Hi, my name is Clara, and at 32 years old, I was the family failure. At least, that's what my family thought while I was secretly building a tech empire. I arrived at my brother's engagement party, ready for another round of pity and ridicule. But everything changed the moment his fiancée, Sophie, leaned in and whispered a few words to me. Words that made my world stand still. Before I tell you how one sentence shattered years of lies and made my family regret the day they wrote me off, please like and subscribe. In the Vance family, expectations weren't just high, they were absolute. We grew up in Boston's prestigious Beacon Hill neighborhood. My mother, Margaret, was a university professor, and my father, David, was a well-known architect in the city. From early childhood, everything in our lives was a competition, and my older brother, Ethan, always came out the winner. The phrase, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became the background music of my childhood. It wasn't that I was unintelligent. Ethan and I just thought differently. He was the perfect student, he memorized facts and reproduced them brilliantly, eventually becoming valedictorian. I, on the other hand, constantly asked questions, trying to understand how to improve existing systems. My third-grade teacher once called me a creative disruptor. My father just considered me a difficult child. I remember our mandatory study nights. "Clara, focus," my mother would say. "Your brother has already completed 2 practice entrance exams. What have you accomplished?" The truth was, while they were forcing me to cram history, I was secretly learning to code. I built my first primitive website at 11, and by 14, I had written a simple app. But in the Vance family's world of achievements, that didn't count as success. In high school, the gap between us became enormous. Ethan was sent to an elite boarding school in New England, while I remained at our local private school. Every family dinner was now about discussing Ethan's successes and asking awkward questions about why, despite expensive tutors, I didn't have top marks in math. The only person who understood me was my Aunt Julia, my father's younger sister. She was also the black sheep of the family, choosing the path of an artist instead of following in her parents' footsteps. "They'll never be able to understand us, Clara," she told me once in her paint-scented studio. "We see the world differently, notice opportunities where they only see a well-trodden path. It's not a flaw. It's our gift." When Ethan was accepted into Stanford, continuing the family tradition, the celebrations in our house went on for weeks. A year later, when I got into Carnegie Mellon, a university I chose deliberately for its top-tier engineering and innovation program, the reaction was noticeably cooler. "Well, at least it's a very prestigious technical school," my mother sighed. "Though Stanford, of course, would have given you more useful connections for the future." I only lasted 3 semesters at Carnegie Mellon. And then I dropped out, committing, by Vance family standards, the ultimate sin. The day I told them, my father simply stood up and walked out of the room. "We invested a fortune in your education," my mother said in an icy tone. "And now what? You're going to work as a barista?" "I have an offer from an IT startup," I tried to explain. "Real-world experience is valued much more than a diploma right now." "A startup?" My father snorted, returning to the room. "One of those trendy garage projects that shuts down in 6 months? Is that what you traded an education at one of the country's best universities for?" No matter how much I tried to explain the opportunities it opened up, they saw nothing but the absence of a prestigious degree. From that day on, I became a cautionary tale in our family, a living example of wasted potential. At family holidays, relatives would ask about me in whispers, and my parents would vaguely reply that I was still finding myself. Meanwhile, Ethan graduated from Stanford with honors, then from Harvard Business School, after which he landed a high-level position at a global consulting firm. With each passing year, he seemed to grow more embarrassed by me, as if my failure could somehow rub off on him. The final straw was my cousin's wedding when I was 24. I overheard my mother telling Aunt Vivian, "We're so worried about her, it's a good thing we at least have Ethan to be proud of." That night, I made a decision. I was leaving Boston. During my time at the startup, I had managed to save a little money and make some useful contacts. Silicon Valley was calling me, and I was ready to take the risk. "You're just running away," my mother accused when I announced my move to San Francisco. "I'm not running from something, I'm running to something," I corrected her. "To a future that you're simply incapable of seeing." My father just shook his head. "When this California dream of yours fails, don't expect any help from us." When I was packing my things, only Aunt Julia came to help. "Do you know the difference between you and the rest of the Vance family?" she asked, taping up a box. "You're brave enough to fail on your own terms, rather than succeed on theirs." I left Boston with a couple of suitcases, a laptop, and $2,500 in my bank account. In my family's eyes, I had finally cemented my status as a disappointment. They had no idea that this failure was the first step toward creating something that would exceed all their wildest expectations. Arriving in Austin with a couple of $1,000s in my account should have been terrifying. But instead, I felt an intoxicating sense of freedom. For the first time, I could live by my own rules, without the constant comparison to the Vance family standards. I rented a tiny studio apartment, all I could afford, and got a job as a junior developer at a health tech startup. The salary was small, but the experience was priceless. My boss, Marcus Wagner, became the mentor I never had. "You have a unique way of seeing systems," he told me one day after I had optimized an internal workflow, saving the company hundreds of man-hours. "You don't see what is, but what could be." Unlike my family, Marcus valued my way of thinking. He entrusted me with increasingly complex tasks and, despite my junior position, invited me to meetings with key partners. It was at one of those meetings, 8 months into my job, that the idea came to me. We were discussing the main problem in medical data exchange: how to make different, outdated systems understand each other. Existing solutions were expensive, clumsy, and required a huge amount of manual work. What if we approached it from a different angle? I asked, quickly sketching a diagram on my tablet. Instead of trying to make old systems friends, we could create a universal translator, a software layer that would automatically standardize data from any source. A moment of silence fell over the room. Then our CEO said, "If that were possible, it would completely change the game in this industry." "It is possible," I replied confidently. "And I know how to do it." That night, I stayed up until 4 in the morning, creating the first prototype of what would eventually become Metal Inc., the platform that revolutionized the entire healthcare industry. The next 7 months were a frantic rush, work at the office during the day, and refining my prototype at night and on weekends. When I finally decided to show it to Marcus, his reaction was unequivocal: "Clara, this is brilliant. You have to quit everything and focus on this." Quitting was scary, but I had saved enough to last me 6 months. My tiny studio turned into a 24/7 office, and my diet consisted mainly of instant noodles and coffee. I worked 18-hour days. The breakthrough came at a small IT meetup in Austin where I was presenting my project. After the presentation, a female investor approached me. "What you've created solves a billion-dollar problem," she said bluntly. "I want to invest in it." 3 weeks later, I had $700,000 in seed investment in my bank account, and my company, Metal Inc., was officially registered. I decided to stay in the shadows for a while, using only my initials, KV, in official documents. For public meetings with investors, I hired an experienced CEO to be the face of the company. This decision was partly strategic. Statistics show that female founders receive less funding. But it was also personal. I didn't want my family to find out about my success until I was ready to tell them. On my own terms. The first year was incredibly tough. I hired just 2 employees, and we worked out of a former warehouse on the outskirts of Austin. There were nights when I fell asleep right under my desk. Several times, I was on the verge of giving up. But gradually, step by step, we started signing contracts with hospitals. By the end of the second year, we had a team of 15, had raised another $3 million in investment, and our product was being used by 15 major healthcare networks across the country. We were profitable. The third year was a year of explosive growth. Metalink was being talked about as a revolutionary solution for the entire industry. Our staff grew to 50 employees, we moved into a real office in downtown Austin, and I was finally able to trade my tiny studio for a modest one-bedroom apartment. Throughout this time, I maintained only the bare minimum of communication with my family, perfunctory calls on holidays and formal birthday cards. That was it. They never asked for details about my work, presumably believing I was still scraping by in some insignificant IT position. I was in no hurry to correct them, letting them continue to believe that I was their greatest disappointment. By its 5th year, Metalink had a market valuation of $400 million. We had contracts with 300 medical networks, had expanded into the Canadian and UK markets, and our staff exceeded 100 people. Industry publications called our technology a breakthrough that had finally solved the problem of data exchange in healthcare. I was richer than I could have ever imagined, but I continued to live quite modestly. My only luxury was an apartment with a beautiful view of the city. The only person in the entire family who knew the truth was Aunt Julia. In the 3rd year, I flew her to Austin and showed her our office. "I always knew you'd prove them all wrong," she said, hugging me tightly. "But you do realize you'll have to tell them someday, right?" "When I'm ready," I replied. "And on my terms." As it turned out, fate had its own plans for how everything would be revealed. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday in early October. It was an elegant, dark blue envelope with silver embossing. I knew it was something important before I even opened it. My family didn't send letters for no reason. Inside was a formal invitation to an engagement dinner for my brother, Ethan, to be held in 3 weeks at our parents' house. Attached was a note in Ethan's handwriting. "Clara, it would mean a lot to me if you could come. It's been too long." I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the elegant envelope as my morning coffee grew cold. 5 years. It had been a full 5 years since I had last seen my entire family together. Our communication had dwindled to short, formal holiday calls. I had seen Ethan 2 years ago when he was in Austin for work. Our lunch was strained and awkward. He talked non-stop about his accomplishments, and when it came to my work, he asked only general, uninterested questions. My first reaction was to decline. I had my company, meetings, deadlines. But something made me pause. Maybe it was simple curiosity. Or maybe it was a deeply buried desire to have a family after all. That evening, I called Aunt Julia. The return of the prodigal daughter, she chuckled when I told her about the invitation. "So, are you going?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. On one hand, it feels like willingly walking into a lion's den. They have their fixed opinion of me. Why would I want to go through that again? "Maybe it's time to change that opinion," she suggested gently. "You're not the same girl who left 5 years ago." "But I don't want to make a show of my success." "I'm not suggesting you do," Julia replied. "But hiding your achievements forever isn't the answer either. You've built something incredible, Clara. That's just a fact. You don't have to boast about it, but you shouldn't have to hide it either." After hanging up, I went out onto my balcony and looked at the lights of downtown Austin for a long time. Maybe it was time to at least crack open the door to reconciliation, even if I wasn't ready to walk all the way through it. The next day, I RSVP'd and bought a ticket to Boston. The 3 weeks leading up to the trip flew by in a blur. I deliberately buried myself in work to avoid thinking about the upcoming family reunion. The night before my flight, I stood in front of my closet for a long time. The simple act of choosing an outfit had turned into a strategic challenge. I could afford any designer piece, but showing up in one would mean revealing all my cards immediately. In the end, I settled on understated, high-quality classics, elegant enough for the dinner, but not screaming money. The entire flight from Austin to Boston, I replayed possible conversations in my head. How should I answer questions about my job? How open should I be? What should I say when the inevitable condescending comments started? As the plane descended over Boston, I looked at the familiar city skyline and felt a strange mix of nostalgia, anxiety, and a new, unfamiliar confidence. From the airport, I took a taxi, gazing at the familiar streets. Boston had hardly changed. Unlike the ever-evolving Austin, it had always prided itself on its traditions. Instead of going to my parents' house, as they undoubtedly expected, I booked a room at the Liberty Hotel in Beacon Hill. This small act of defiance was important to me. I needed my own neutral space to retreat to if things went wrong. After I checked in and freshened up, I received a text from Ethan, looking forward to tonight. Mom and Dad are also very happy you're here. I seriously doubted the last part, but I replied with a short, me too. See you at 8. At 7:45, I stood in front of the Beacon Hill townhouse, the house where I grew up. I paused on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the familiar facade. 5 years ago, I had left this place with a sense of complete failure. Today, I returned as the founder of a $400 million company. And still, my hand trembled slightly as I reached for the doorbell. My father, David Vance, opened the door. He had barely changed, tall, stately, in an impeccable suit. Clara, he said in his usual, slightly formal tone before giving me a brief, stiff hug. You made it. Hi, Dad, I replied, stepping into the house filled with the familiar childhood sense of my mother's lilies and furniture polish. Thanks for the invitation. Everyone's in the living room, he said, already turning his back to me. Your mother has been cooking since morning. I walked down the hallway, its walls covered with family photos. I couldn't help but notice that Ethan's photo chronicle was constantly updated: graduations, vacations, professional portraits. My section of the wall was frozen in time, ending with my high school graduation photo. When I entered the living room, the conversations momentarily ceased. My mother stood up to greet me with a carefully rehearsed smile. Clara, dear, she said, pulling me into a short, formal embrace. How was your flight? It was fine, Mom. You look wonderful. And this is Sophie, Ethan said, leading a tall, elegant blonde woman toward me. My fiancée, Sophie Miller. Sophie was not at all what I had imagined. I had expected another old money heiress, but she had a warm, genuine smile and a firm handshake. I've heard so much about you, she said, and there wasn't a hint of insincerity in her voice. I hope it was all good, I joked, and immediately regretted it when I saw my mother's lips tighten in disapproval. Not at all, Sophie replied gently. Ethan told me you're in IT in Austin. That must be very interesting. I didn't have a chance to respond. My mother immediately intervened, pulling me to another part of the room. Come, let me introduce you to everyone. You remember Uncle Mark and Aunt Susan, don't you? And here's your cousin Emily with her husband. The next 15 minutes were a blur of handshakes and formal hugs with distant relatives. Some seemed genuinely happy to see me, while others looked at me with undisguised curiosity, waiting to see the prodigal daughter. The last to arrive was Aunt Julia. She winked at me, gave me a tight hug, and whispered in my ear, "You look amazing. Success suits you." The table setting was my mother Margaret's signature style: family china, crystal glasses, silver candlesticks, and intricate floral arrangements. As a child, these dinners felt like a form of torture I wanted to escape. Now, I looked at it all as a well-staged performance, a demonstration of tradition and status. We took our seats at the table. I was placed between Aunt Julia and Uncle Mark, a dull banker who always spoke to me with condescending politeness. Across from me sat Sophie and Ethan, while my parents took their places at the heads of the long table. So, Clara, my father addressed me from the other end of the table as the appetizers were served. Ethan says you're still in Austin, dabbling in your IT. Is that right? He said the word IT as if I were making friendship bracelets on a beach. Yes, I answered calmly. I work in healthcare technology. Entry-level positions are sometimes a good start, my mother interjected before I could continue. Perhaps you'll work your way up to a management role eventually. I took a sip of water, deciding not to correct her. And where are you living now? Asked Aunt Susan. Still in that studio? I moved into a one-bedroom, I replied, omitting the fact that it was an apartment in one of Austin's most prestigious buildings with a panoramic city view. Well, real estate in Texas is so expensive, she said sympathetically. Everyone has to start somewhere. During the first course, I answered their questions in monosyllables, letting them cling to their fabricated story of my life. I could feel Aunt Julia growing tense beside me, but she remained silent, respecting my choice. When the main course was served, my father stood to give a toast. He spoke at length and with great eloquence about Ethan, his education, his career, and what a perfect choice of a bride he had made. Only at the very end, as an afterthought, did he add, and, of course, we're glad Clara could fly in from Texas to join us. I raised my glass with everyone else and caught Ethan's eye. For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual self-assured smile. The conversation shifted to Sophie. I listened with genuine interest and, to my surprise, found that I liked her much more than I had expected. Sophie works in medical technology, Ethan explained with pride. She's on a team that implements new software in hospitals. That sounds intriguing, I said. What exactly does your work involve? We help hospitals integrate our platform into their existing systems, Sophie explained. It's complex but very rewarding work. Our technology is fundamentally changing how patient data is shared. There was something painfully familiar in her words, but I couldn't immediately place what it was. All this technology of yours, my father scoffed dismissively. I still prefer to have a human doctor making decisions about my health, not a computer. But it's not about replacing doctors, Dad, I countered, surprising myself. It's about giving them better tools and more accurate information to work with. My father raised an eyebrow in surprise, not expecting such a sharp retort from me. Exactly. Sophie chimed in enthusiastically. The system we're implementing has reduced medical errors in some hospitals by 40%. Simply because all the doctors have access to a single, accurate source of patient information. At that moment, I tensed up. That figure, 40%, was all too familiar to me. What's the name of your company? I asked, my heart starting to beat faster. It's called Integrated Health Solutions, Sophie replied. But we're best known for our main product, MetaLink. It's a real revolution. I was so happy when I got a job there 6 months ago. The conversation at the table continued, but for me, the world had narrowed to a single point. Sophie works at my company. The company I built from nothing. In my failed life worth $400 million. Sophie continued to speak with passion to my bewildered relatives about the intricacies of medical data exchange. The founder is a brilliant woman who came up with a completely new approach. She's very private, almost no one has seen her. In the company, everyone just knows her by her initials, KV. But what she created is changing the entire healthcare system. Here she paused and looked at me with a frown. I could see the puzzle pieces clicking into place in her mind, my name, my initials, my insignificant IT job. Her eyes widened. Wait a minute. She whispered, loud enough for everyone sitting nearby to hear. Are you KV? The founder? The conversations at the table instantly died. All eyes turned to me. The fork in my mother's hand clattered against her plate. My father froze with his glass halfway to his lips. In that moment, the two worlds I had so carefully kept separate collided with a deafening crash. You're KV. Sophie repeated, her voice firmer this time. Clara Vance, did you found MetaLink? I held her gaze from across the table, feeling the eyes of my entire family on me. And in that moment of truth, I felt an incredible sense of calm. Yes, I answered simply. I am. The silence that followed my words was deafening. My mother's face was a mask of utter bewilderment. In my father's eyes, I saw shock, disbelief, and something that looked very much like a rapid financial recalculation. Ethan was staring at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. But that's a company with a $400 million valuation, Uncle Mark finally breathed, breaking the silence. Medilink's platform is used by all the major hospitals in the country. In 312 medical networks in the US, plus 28 in Canada and 16 in the UK, I corrected him gently. And the last valuation was actually $340 million. Aunt Susan let out a quiet gasp. I saw my cousin Emily frantically searching for something on her phone, obviously, information about my company. My father slowly set down his glass. His gaze sharpened, like a lawyer in a courtroom. He was clearly re-evaluating everything he knew about me. Is Clara the CEO of Medilink? Ethan asked Sophie directly, as if I wasn't even in the room. She's not just the CEO, Sophie replied, still trying to process the news. She's the founder. She wrote the entire platform herself. Our CTO says the architecture of her original code was sheer genius. She turned back to me. The company holds 8 patents based on your work. 9, actually, I corrected gently. The 9th was approved last month. Cousin Emily looked up from her phone. It says here that last year, Forbes named Medilink one of the top 10 most innovative companies in healthcare. We were number 6, I nodded. This year, we're hoping to make the top 5. I don't understand, my mother finally said. You never said you founded a company. You said you just worked in IT. I do, I replied. I just didn't specify that the company was mine. Sophie looked at me with a mixture of admiration and horror. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It's just that everyone at the company talks about the founder like some mysterious genius. I never imagined. It's okay, I reassured her. I'm the one who made sure no one knew who I was. My father cleared his throat. Clara, perhaps you could tell us more about your company? It seems we've been out of the loop regarding your professional achievements. A new, fawning tone had entered his voice, the one he reserved for important clients. It made me uneasy. Actually, Aunt Julia interjected with a mischievous glint in her eye, I think what David is trying to say is that they've underestimated you for decades and are only now beginning to realize how wrong they were. She raised her glass in my direction. To Clara, who has achieved more than any of us could have ever imagined. The toast was awkward. Only Sophie, Aunt Julia, and a couple of distant relatives raised their glasses. My mother sat motionless, gripping the tablecloth so tightly her knuckles turned white. When you left Boston, my mother began cautiously, you didn't say you were going to start your own company. Because I wasn't planning to, I explained. At first, I was just working at another IT startup, learning the industry. The idea for Medilink only came to me about 8 months after I moved to Austin. And you never once thought to share your success with your family? There was a hard edge to my father's voice. I looked him straight in the eye. And did you ever genuinely ask about my work? All of our conversations over the past 5 years have been incredibly superficial. You'd ask how things were going in IT, as if I were a sales associate at an electronics store. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But we saw each other 2 years ago. Why didn't you tell me then? Because that entire lunch, you talked about your promotion and your new apartment, I reminded him. And when I tried to talk about my work, you immediately changed the subject. Silence fell over the room again. Their familiar worldview, Clara the failure, was crumbling before their eyes, and no one knew what to say. Sophie, to her credit, tried to defuse the tension. This is just incredible, she said sincerely. To think I'm marrying into the family of the woman who created the platform I work with every day. The hospitals I partner with consider Medilink a true revolution. $400 million, muttered Uncle Mark, still unable to get over the figure. Did you raise venture capital? My father asked, instantly switching into business mode. In the early stages, yes, I nodded. $700,000 in seed funding, then a few more rounds. But we've been profitable since the 3rd year, so we haven't needed it since. And your stake in the company? He pressed. 51%. A controlling interest. My father nodded, impressed. My mother, however, sat frozen. Her high society mask had finally cracked, revealing only confusion underneath. So, all this time, she finally managed to say, "While we were worrying about you, thinking you were barely making ends meet, you were what? The founder of a multi-million-dollar company?" Technically, yes, I admitted. Though that was never the goal. Then what was the goal? Ethan challenged. To make us all feel like idiots? The goal was to solve a problem that needed solving, I answered firmly. To create something useful. The financial success was just a nice bonus. A nice bonus? My father scoffed. 400 million is not a bonus. For the Vance family, maybe not, I said quietly. But for me, the work always came first. My mother pushed her chair back abruptly. I need to check on dessert, she said, even though a catering service was handling the dinner. She quickly exited to the kitchen. I'll help her, whispered Aunt Susan and followed her. The dinner was officially ruined. Sophie, trying to salvage the conversation, turned to me. I have to say, working at your company has been the best experience of my career. The atmosphere is incredible, everyone truly believes in what they're doing. Thank you, I replied sincerely. We work very hard to maintain that. So how many employees do you have now? Ethan asked, clearly trying to keep the conversation going. 146, I answered. Actually, we're opening a Boston office next quarter. In Boston? Aunt Julia's face lit up. Does that mean you'll be here more often? Yes, at first, definitely. My father was watching me with that appraising look again. The health tech sector is at its peak right now. Have you received any offers to acquire the company? A few, I admitted. But I'm not planning to sell. We still have too much work to do. Just then, my mother returned, her expression calmer but still fragile. Dessert will be served shortly, she announced. Clara, perhaps after dinner, you can tell us more about your work. It seems we've missed so much. In her voice, it sounded less like an invitation and more like a reprimand. Dessert was served in a tense silence, punctuated by short, fragmented phrases. The distant relatives now peppered me with specific questions about Metal Inc. My immediate family, however, was each processing the news in their own way. My father had shifted into business mode, suddenly showing a keen interest in every aspect of my business. My mother barely spoke, offering only an occasional strained smile. And Ethan seemed torn between pride for his sister and a feeling that looked a lot like envy. When the guests started moving to the living room, Ethan touched my elbow. Can we talk? He asked quietly. In the study. I followed him into my father's inner sanctum, a room with oak panels and antique books, designed to impress. Ethan closed the door behind us. Why didn't you tell me? 2 years ago, in Austin. Why hide it? I thought for a moment. If you had known, would it have changed anything in our relationship? Of course, he exclaimed. I would have been proud of you. I would have told everyone what a genius founder my sister is. Just like you used to tell everyone about your genius sister who dropped out of college? I retorted. Ethan, our whole lives have been a competition where you always had to win, and I had to lose. I needed to create something of my own. Something that wouldn't be measured by your scale of success or our parents' expectations. He ran a hand through his hair, musing it slightly. I never thought of it as a competition. You didn't have to, I replied. You were always the default winner. That's not true, he objected. I worked hard to achieve everything I have. I know, I agreed. And you deserve your success. But tell me honestly, did you ever have to fight for our parents to take you seriously? Were you ever called a disappointment? He was silent. There was nothing to say. When I left Boston, I continued, I needed to figure out who I was outside of the script the Vance family had written for me. I needed to succeed or fail, but on my own terms. And you succeeded, he said quietly. Spectacularly. Yes, I nodded. But I want you to understand, I didn't do it to prove anything to you. There was a knock on the door, and my father walked in without waiting for an answer. "Ah, there you are," he said in a businesslike tone. "Clara, I was just thinking. Your expansion into the Boston market is a perfect opportunity. I know several people on the boards of local hospitals. Valuable connections. We should set up a couple of meetings while you're here." This abrupt shift, from condescending parent to business broker, was astounding. "Dad, I already have meetings scheduled with Mass General and Beth Israel. Our team has been preparing this launch for months." Of course, he nodded, not the least bit fazed. But a personal introduction opens doors that are closed to officials. Connolly's son, Brendan, is the chief of surgery at Beacon Hill Medical Center. I can arrange a dinner. Thank you, I replied cautiously. But we're already working with Beacon Hill Medical Center. They've been using our platform for over a year. My father was momentarily flustered but recovered quickly. Well, there are other contacts. The Boston medical community is a very tight-knit world, Ethan intervened. I don't think now is the best time for this. My father frowned, his gaze shifting from me to Ethan. I'm just trying to help. Clara has built something impressive, and I have the right connections. Those connections would have been very useful 5 years ago, I said quietly. When I was sharing my ideas with you, and you called it a Texas fantasy. A flash of embarrassment crossed his face. That was different. You had no real results back then. Now you've proven yourself. So I only deserve your support after I've already succeeded without it? The study door opened again. My mother stood on the threshold. Her perfect hostess posture had cracked, and I could see the storm raging inside her. "Clara," she said in a strained voice. "We need to talk." My father and Ethan exchanged a look. "We'll leave you alone," my father said and led Ethan out of the room. When the door closed, my mother remained standing, her arms crossed over her chest. "Why didn't you tell us?" She repeated Ethan's question, but her voice held more bitterness. "All these years, you let us think you were barely making ends meet. Do you have any idea how worried we were about you?" "Were you worried, Mom?" I asked gently. "Or were you ashamed of me?" Her cheeks flushed. "How can you say that?" "Of course, we were worried. You dropped out of college, moved to the other side of the country, barely called. And did you ever once truly ask what I was doing? Show genuine interest in my work, instead of just dismissing it as something not serious?" "How were we supposed to know if you never said anything?" she retorted. "I stopped talking when I realized no one was listening," I replied. "When I was leaving, Dad told me, when that Texas fantasy of yours fails, don't expect any help. You wrote the script for my life yourselves, without even giving me a chance to live it." She sank into an armchair, suddenly looking haggard and old. "We just wanted the best for you." "No," I corrected her. "You wanted for me what you thought was best. And that's not the same thing. We gave you everything," her voice trembled. "The best schools, the best tutors. You gave me everything that would have helped you succeed," I replied. "But I'm not you. And I'm not Ethan. I needed something different. And now you've achieved it all yourself, without us," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "Was this whole evening just to show us how wrong we were?" "This evening was for my brother's engagement," I said firmly. I had no intention of revealing anything. It happened by accident. She was silent for a long time, studying me as if for the first time. "You really have built something worthwhile, haven't you?" "Yes," I answered simply. "I have." "And you didn't want to share that with us?" I sighed. "Mom, sharing takes 2 people. When was the last time we talked about anything important? We've been playing family 4 years, but there hasn't been any real closeness between us for a long time." She flinched at my words. "I thought you grew distant because you were unhappy, ashamed of your choices." "I grew distant because I was tired of being constantly judged and devalued." It was easier to keep you at a distance than to constantly defend myself. And so your path led you to incredible success, she stated. While we were pitying you all this time. I never wanted your pity, I said. I wanted your acceptance. Aunt Julia peeked into the room. Sorry to interrupt, but some of the guests are leaving and wanted to say goodbye. My mother immediately straightened up, her face resuming its familiar society expression. The social mask was back in place. We'll continue this later, she said and headed for the living room. I followed her and immediately felt the change in the atmosphere. People were addressing me differently, with a new, unaccustomed respect. Uncle Mark, who an hour ago had scoffed at my IT job, was now vigorously shaking my hand. We absolutely must have lunch while you're in town, he said, handing me his business card. I have a couple of investment ideas I'm sure will interest you. Aunt Susan hugged me with unexpected warmth. We always knew you were special, dear, she said, rewriting the history of our relationship on the spot. When the last guests had left and only the family remained, the atmosphere grew even more tense. It's time for me to go, too, I said, grabbing my coat. It's getting late. You're staying at a hotel? My mother asked, surprised. Yes, at the Liberty. You could have stayed with us, she said, a note of hurt in her voice. I think we all need a little personal space tonight, I replied diplomatically. Sophie approached me. I still feel terrible for putting you in that position. But I have to say, it's an honor to truly get to know you. What you've created is incredible. Her sincerity was disarming. Thank you. And please, don't worry about it. It would have come out sooner or later. Maybe we could get coffee tomorrow, she asked hopefully. I'd love to hear how you came up with the idea for Metal Ink. I'd love that, I replied, surprised at how genuinely I meant it. Ethan walked me to the door. He stopped just before we reached it. This is all very unexpected. But I want you to know, I'm proud of you, Clara. I really am. Thank you, I said, looking at the brother I had once been so close to, before the endless competition drove us apart. That means a lot to me. Stepping out into the cool Boston night air, I felt both empty and strangely free. The wall I had spent years building between my past and my present had collapsed. What would be built in its place was still unclear. Back in my hotel room, I kicked off my shoes and fell exhausted onto the huge bed. I replayed the evening's events in my mind, trying to sort through the whirlwind of emotions. There was bitterness, relief, sadness for the lost years, and complete uncertainty about the future. Just then, a text came from Aunt Julia. You were magnificent tonight. Breakfast is on me tomorrow. I smiled and texted back, it's a date. If anyone could help me make sense of it all, it was her. It was a restless night. I had strange, jumbled dreams. I was at a family dinner trying to explain a quarterly report. I was leading a board meeting while my mother criticized my presentation slides. I woke before dawn and watched the sky over Boston turn pink. Julia was already waiting for me at a small cafe near the public garden, dressed as always in her bright, artistic outfits. There she is, my aunt smiled, standing to hug me. I assume you're the talk of Beacon Hill today? Is it that bad? I chuckled, sitting down at the table. Susan called me at 7 this morning to get all the details, Julia nodded. Now I think she's telling everyone she always knew there was something special about you. I couldn't help but laugh. 5 years of condescending pity, and suddenly she always knew. That's Boston society for you, Julia shrugged. But let's not talk about them. How are you? On one hand, I feel relieved. I don't have to live a double life anymore. On the other, I don't know how to talk to my family now. That's up to you now, Julia said, stirring sugar into her coffee. For the first time in years, you're in a position of power. Not just financially, but emotionally. You get to set the rules now. I never wanted power over them, I sighed. I just wanted to be accepted. Sometimes, she remarked, to get the second, you have to acquire the first. It's sad, but true. After breakfast with Aunt Julia, I went to meet Sophie at a cafe near her office. Outside of the family setting, she impressed me even more. She was smart, insightful, and genuinely passionate about her work. Our implementation team has been talking for a while about a couple of new features that could simplify everything, she explained enthusiastically, describing workflows. I never imagined I'd be saying this directly to the platform's creator. That's exactly the kind of feedback we're missing, I replied. Closing the gap between developers and end users is our main priority. As we said goodbye, I realized I had not only gained invaluable insights for my product but had also possibly found a new friend. To my surprise, I found that I respected and genuinely approved of my brother's choice. The most difficult conversation took place that day over lunch. My parents invited me to their country club. The choice of venue was deliberate. It was neutral territory where loud scenes were inappropriate, but it was still their territory. We've been doing a lot of thinking, my father began as soon as the menus arrived. And we realize we need to apologize to you. The words were so unexpected that I froze for a moment. We were blind to your potential, he continued. We tried to measure your success by traditional standards and completely overlooked your innovation and unique vision. My mother nodded, though the words came harder for her. We were genuinely worried about you. But we should have trusted you more instead of trying to control everything. Their apology seemed sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still apologizing to the successful founder of a company, not the daughter they had rejected. Still, it was a first step. I appreciate that, I said, choosing my words carefully. But it's important for me that you understand one thing. My value as a person isn't equal to my company's valuation. Even if Metalink had failed, even if I had remained in a modest job in Austin, I would have still deserved your respect. My father fell silent, looking flustered, but my mother suddenly looked at me in a new light. She reached across the table and touched my hand. You're right, she said quietly. That's a lesson we still have to learn. We've always measured everything by accomplishments. We raised you and Ethan the same way, demanding success, and it probably wasn't fair to either of you. Not really, I agreed. Can we try to start over? My father asked. Not pretending nothing happened, but just trying to build a different kind of relationship. I looked at their tired, hopeful faces. We can try. But it will be a long road. Trust has been broken, and we've all been hurt. A few days before I returned to Austin, Ethan and I had an unexpectedly candid conversation. We were sitting on a park bench near his house, and as he watched the squirrels, he admitted how much pressure he had felt from our parents' expectations. You were able to leave, he said. I stayed and spent my whole life trying to be the perfect son they wanted. Sometimes I wonder which of us made the right choice. It's not about who was right or wrong, I replied. We just chose different paths. And for what it's worth, you're really good at what you do. You too, he smiled. And for the first time, his smile held no trace of rivalry. Returning to Austin, I brought with me a fragile hope that our family relationships could be mended. The wounds wouldn't heal overnight, but we had at least acknowledged their existence, and that was a huge step. The trip changed me, too. At work, I began to step out of the shadows more often, embracing my role as the public face of the company I had built. I realized my desire to remain anonymous was tied to old insecurities I no longer needed. I also started to reevaluate my work-life balance. My company had become my everything because I had cut off other important parts of myself, the roles of daughter, sister, friend. Now I was slowly but surely rebuilding those connections, not just with my family, but with my colleagues and the community as well. 3 months after that dinner, I flew back to Boston, this time for the official opening of our new office. My parents and Ethan were at the ceremony, and I could see the genuine pride in their eyes as they listened to my speech about the company's mission and future plans. You've always had that leadership quality in you, my mother said later, and her voice held sincere admiration, not surprise. Over dinner that evening, I caught myself thinking that their lack of support during those difficult years had, strangely enough, only made me stronger. I had learned to trust myself and to find validation in the results of my work, not in the praise of others. What are Metalink's future plans? My father asked with genuine interest. International expansion, I replied. The problems we solve exist all over the world. And what are your plans? Personally, my mother asked. It seemed like the first time in my life she had ever asked me that question. I smiled. To find balance. I've realized that creating something important at work doesn't have to exclude building a happy personal life. And I'm just starting to learn how. The next day, flying back to Austin, I thought about the strange journey I had been on. 5 years ago, I had left Boston branded a disappointment. Now I was returning, successful by any measure, but with a firm understanding that external validation was never the true measure of worth. That evening, I stood on my balcony, looking at the city lights. My phone buzzed. It was a photo from Sophie. She had just successfully completed our system implementation at a new hospital. It was followed by a text from my mother, asking when I planned to visit next. The path to healing our family relationships was just beginning. But for the first time in years, I felt like we were all moving in the same direction. I had spent years building a platform that connects disparate systems. Perhaps now I could apply the same principles to connect the disparate parts of my own life. I realized that true success isn't measured in money or recognition. True success is creating something that aligns with your values and makes the world a little better. Whether it's a company, a relationship, or simply a life lived on your own terms. Have you ever had to prove something to those who didn't believe in you? Share your stories in the comments.